Good morning and welcome to the August 15th meeting of the Environmental Protection Commission. We're going to start with a pledge with Commissioner White, if you could also give the invocation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. Attention, salute, pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Heavenly Father, I thank you for our beautiful surroundings, our clean water, clean air, and also thank you for the industries like our agricultural industry and building industry that give us food and shelter. And I pray this morning that you will give this board, our staff and stakeholders, the wisdom to keep all these things in the proper balance. Lord, as always, I pray for our armed forces and our first responders. Pray that you will guide them, keep them safe each and every day. And finally, Lord, I would like to pray for the families of a couple of environmental champions from our community that have recently passed on, Gus Munich and Dina Levengood. Pray for comfort and healing for their families, and also just thank you, Lord, for their time here on earth and for all of the good things that they have done while they were here with us. I ask for all of these blessings and give all of these thanks in your heavenly name. Amen.
Amen. Yeah, thank you for the invocation. I think I'll just take a second. I think many people knew that Gus had been sick for a long time, but I know for me, I've known Dina for some decades, and it was a very sudden and unexpected passing, as she was probably in her early 60s and was scheduled to speak on Friday morning. So, I just thank you for recognizing both of them. Oh, Commissioner White, you're recognized.
And I would just like to thank each and every one of you. When we were wearing our Board of County Commissioners hats, we named that trail at Cockroach Bay Aquatic Preserve in Gus's honor. And just want to thank you again for supporting that initiative. And I know it meant a lot to Gus and his family for him to see that come to fruition while he was still with us. So thank you.
And before we move forward, I'd like to read a memo into the record from Commissioner Les Miller. Chairman Kemp, please be advised that due to a scheduling conflict, I'm unable to attend Thursday, August 15, 2019 EPC meeting. Please read the reason for my absence into the record. And do we have any changes to the agenda, any removal from consent?
Commissioner, there was an addendum for the recognitions that we are going to do for two of our staff individuals.
Okay. Do we have a motion to? So we have a motion by Commissioner Merman and a second, and by I think Commissioner Overman. Thank you. So seeing no further discussion.
Motion carried 6-0.
Thank you. And we'll move now to the recognitions.
Thank you, Commissioners. It is my honor today to recognize two of our emerging leaders at EPC. I wanted to give you a little background. Since 2015, since I've been there, the agency has been having succession planning. And I want to give a shout out to Nicole Garcia, who recommended this Florida Certified Public Managers Training. It's a very rigorous program. It's put on by FSU, and let me just tell you a little bit about the program. It's nationally designated in 38 states, and it's all over the world. It's in Netherlands. Florida's CPM is in 21 cities. And this year, they graduated 380 graduates this summer. In front of you, you will see the list of individuals Pinellas, Pasco, Polk, tax collectors, the Sheriff's Department. And the program is extremely robust. It's 18 to 24 months long. It takes about 32 days. And what I want to say about these leaders, at EPC, all of our supervisors and managers carry full permitting and compliance loads. So they manage in addition to their duties. And in the next 5 to 10 years, I think right now we've probably replaced, Rick, I think, what would you say, about 20% of the agency with a lot of new, young, energetic individuals, and we will be probably at 50% not long from now as people continue to enter the DROP program. We're very excited about this program. These two individuals are from the Wetland Division and from the Waste Division. You'll see from this picture, when we went to their graduation, their families are with them. The director for Waste, Hushang Bustani, and Andy Schipfer from the Wetlands Division was there as well. But I'd like to bring up at this time Stephanie Wickham and Christina Bryant. They are amazing young women, and I want to personally recognize them and give them some gifts from senior management. I'd like Andy and Hushang to come up as well. They were the first candidates. We are planning to do it. It's a very nominal fee for the robust program that it is, the FSU program. We do plan to move on to the water division as well as the air division for our next class graduates to come through. But again, I just want to thank them. They have to juggle chainsaws on a daily basis. They have an amazing skill set and they have to do a lot of work. And they did this in addition to managing and in addition to running their programs. Stephanie and Christina, we can't thank you enough. It was such a proud moment for us to be there in Pinellas County. And these are the graduate certificates that they received. And we also, senior management has some books, some leadership books. Obviously, The Giving Tree, Emotional Intelligence, Good to Great, and a lot of other books. And we also gave each of the recipients a gift card to Barnes & Noble so they can start their own leadership library, which I'm sure they've probably read these, and they'll probably end up passing them out to staff as well. Andy and Hoosh, do you want to say anything?
Thank you, Janet. I'll be short. I just want to repeat what Janet said about both of these team members. They're wonderful. I've had the honor of working with both of them for all the time they've been at EPC, and they are, like Janet says, emerging leaders for the agency, and we're really proud and happy to have them with us.
Morning, Commissioners. I've been lucky enough to have both Stephanie and Christina work directly for me through the years, and they've kept me really busy over that period of time. It's been an absolute blessing to have wonderful people that are always ready to step forward, take on more responsibility, take on more duties and tasks. And one of the things that makes me comforted in is knowing that we have our future leaders, so that when I pass onto the torch on, and that's not too far away, I am in one of those drop candidates that she's talking about. We have some great people to take over, and both of them are just wonderful employees, and we're blessed to have them.
Could you identify yourself for the record, please, sir? Sir?
Andy Schipfer.
Thank you.
And Hushang Bustani. Before I bring up Stephanie and Christina to say a couple of words, one of the things that impressed me about the program was they have this book called Encouraging the Heart. And if anyone knows about the Sterling program that we went through in EPC, it's all about servant leadership, serving our customers, serving our employees. And I had never read this book before, and Stephanie gave me a copy of it, so I'll let y'all know how it is. But my understanding is that every participant had to read this book, and it was a wonderful book. And I think it emulates what we try to achieve at the agency. So with that, I'll bring up Stephanie Wickham.
Hello, Commissioners. I'm so honored to be here today. I really want to thank Janet and all of senior staff for giving us this opportunity. It was amazing. It's a transformational experience, and we couldn't have done it without our team back at the office. So everybody really stepped up and pulled the load while we were gone, so we really, really appreciate them, and I just thank you all.
And Christina Bryant.
Good morning, Commissioners. Christina Bryant. It goes without saying that when you have the opportunity to step up, you have to grasp it. Working at EPC has been opportunity after opportunity. Janet, Husheng, Andy, all of senior staff, the staff as a whole functions as a family, and when one person is gone, it just fills the void and keeps on going. Specifically, your support for our agency and the fact that you stand behind us and support us, it's amazing. We appreciate it. We thank you. And there are no words to express how good it makes you feel as an individual to know that you have the support of your senior management and of the entire staff at the agency. So thank you, and I appreciate it.
Thank you.
That concludes our presentation. Unless there are any comments, we'll take a
Thank
picture.
you so much. I just want to say it's not only are you all doing an incredible job of protecting the environment in Hillsborough County, but I can see that you do, and we all know that you do so well at kind of passing the baton and making sure that our county remains in good environmental hands. So I want to thank you all for everything that you do, and it sounds like a good reading list. And I'll recognize Commissioner Overman.
Thank you, Chair. Being relatively new, I get to see how many departments or how many agencies that Hillsborough County has available to it to protect our citizens and to create great things. What I have noticed about learning about all the individuals that work at EPC and how this organization is run is a perfect example of the great leadership that you bring to the table, and recognize the value of those that are serving not only the agencies and have for many years, but the promise of the young people that are joining the organization. One of the things I've noticed working with government agencies before I actually ended up in this chair is that there frequently was a forgetfulness of the importance of building your pipeline, of building a succession plan. It is the right thing to do in private industry, and many businesses struggle with putting that together. I'm in the process of dealing with that right now with my private practice. But what I watch you do at EPC in celebrating everyone that works there is a perfect example about how an organization should run. To the two of you, I am so proud to see two women stand here and take leadership in an organization, and I think all of Hillsborough County will be best served by you. So thank you so much for doing what you're doing and to stepping to the plate and positioning yourself for leadership within the organization. It takes that courage and insight for all of us to benefit, and thank you so much for being here. Congratulations.
Thank you all. And we're going to take some. We're going to do some pictures. Mm-hmm.
Lamar can be it. I didn't even. Oh, Lamar. I'm so sorry. Christina's son Lamar is here. Come on up, Lamar. I had no idea. Stephanie, is anyone else here? No. They're at school. Lamar's getting ready to go to college. Where are you going to college, Lamar? FAMU. So congratulations, sir.
Here we go. 1, 2, and 3. And always one more for good measure. Thank you.
It's okay. Yeah.
Since I did this a little out of order, I'll just just check again. Is there any public comment this morning? I didn't think so. So we'll just move on to our regular agenda, and looking forward to this presentation on coastal resiliency. We did that before. I did it out of order.
No, we did. I don't think we have, Commissioner.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Thank you. Move to approve consent. We have a motion by Commissioner Merman and a second by Commissioner Overman. Did you want to speak, Commissioner Smith?
No, I thought we were on the next thing.
Uh-huh. Please record your vote.
Motion carried 6-0.
And we will open up the regular agenda here, and Commissioner Smith, you're recognized.
Thank you. I'm really excited about this presentation that we have, and thank you all for agreeing to have this on the agenda today. I'll just remind you, in January 2015, the EPC convened a regional summit about climate adaptation and focusing on sea level rise and flooding from rain events, but climate adaptation as a whole. And I participated in that, as did Commissioner Kemp. And it was at the aquarium led by Dr. Garrity, Ms. Doherty's predecessor, and brought together lots of community leaders to discuss a program led by scientists, science-based discussion of the impacts of climate change and what we can do to make our community resilient. And the presentations from that summit are still on the EPC website, and I recommend them to all of you. They were very good presentations, and they're still very relevant. But today's presentation falls right in line with that work and updates the sea level rise projections and data. And it's also in line with what our new governor is doing. Governor DeSantis has appointed a new resilience officer to oversee how the state deals with climate change, and with everything ranging from sea level rise to rising temperatures and extreme heat. And so as the county commission's representative on the multi-county regional resiliency coalition, I saw this report that Maya is about to present, and at a meeting of that body, and I'm very, very impressed by it, and wanted to share it with all of you. So I'll just say that climate change and sea level rise have kind of surprisingly different impacts in different areas of the globe, in different areas of the country. And the scientists at Tampa Bay Estuary Program have taken the national data of NOAA and applied it to everything they know, their vast body of knowledge and history of examining Tampa Bay specifically. And so they are able to give us a customized report of projected sea level rise, especially for our area. And so this science-based report is important information for all of us to consider as we make plans to make our community resilient. And Janet, do you have some information about this?
I just had a couple of quick comments. Back in 2015, when that was going on, I attended that as well. The Washington Post wrote an article July of 2017, and basically there's 700 miles of coastline in Tampa Bay, but the analysts said that this area, the Tampa Bay area, in this Washington Post article, was the most vulnerable to flooding and damage if it took a major hurricane hit. The last hurricane that came through here was in 1921. It was a Category 3 hurricane. That was 8 feet of standing water at Hillsborough Avenue. And what this article led to was a second article in August. It talked about the 5 most vulnerable cities. Tampa Bay was the most vulnerable. But it mentioned Hurricane Harvey and Houston, and it's the most extreme rain event ever. And that dropped 4 feet on Houston that day and cost $4 billion. But what the article went on to say was that analysts in Tampa Bay, which includes the city of Tampa and St. Petersburg, is the most vulnerable in the United States to flooding and damage in the event of a major hurricane. A direct hit would likely surpass the cost of Hurricane Katrina. And the one Boston firm that analyzed potential catastrophic damage estimated cost of more than $175 billion to the region. So we had $4 billion for Harvey. This is if a Cat 5 came through. You know, these are just worst case scenarios, but that's why it's important to be prepared. And so in 2017, the county embarked on a vulnerability assessment. It's been 2 years in the making. It's very robust. It's at the University of South Florida. We do have Kevin Moran in the audience, who works with George Cassidy and Lucia and John Lyons and Bart Weiss on their environmental group. We work with them as well. But each of you, if you would like to read the Peril of Flood Act by Senator Brandis, it's at your seat right now. And that act required you to look at sea level rise and hardening of surfaces and building of bridges and all of those things. So I just kind of wanted to tee up the background. You did a great job of talking about that summit. But out of that, we have the Coastal Resiliency Committee, One Tampa Bay. There's been a lot of groups created to help with this problem and to find solutions. So we are so pleased to have Maya Burke here today. And I'll be happy to get anyone copies of these articles if they would like them. But thank you so much. I think the work that you're doing is valuable. And I really love that all of this is science-based as well and that it is robust. So we appreciate you being here to give this presentation.
Before we start, just a couple of things. Did you say, I just have to check this, 1921 hurricane, 8 feet at Hillsborough Avenue?
Correct. That's accurate.
Oh, I just can't even imagine. But and the only other before is that I find many people don't know. It was on the front page of the Times about the flood that recently occurred at the Vinoy Hotel in St. Petersburg, which is right by the pier, and I'm probably 100 years old. I had no idea till I read the article that it has an underground garage. And just within the last month, for the first time that I think that they've ever recorded, it was struck with a high tide and a rainfall of 5 inches in 1 hour. And the garage flooded up to the windows of cars. Many cars were destroyed. People couldn't get their cars out. I'm not sure. They never gave final information about that. But that, I think, is a precursor of perhaps what's to come. That's been around for a century, and that just occurred. And we're getting more of these rainfall bombs and all this. So Commissioner Overman, you're recognized.
Thank you. It is not lost on me how critically important it is that we get an update on this. For the last 5 days, and it's just raining, summer rains, my phone has alerted me that there's flooding in the area, to be cautious. Apparently I've set it at a range that is important to pay attention to. So we already have flooding with just normal summer storms. It is critically important as we look at our growth plans, which we have a workshop this afternoon to take a look at a lot of those issues. We look at how we're growing, where we're growing, and how we build resiliency. Taking this kind of information to heart and pay attention to it gives us the best ability, I think, to lead and to protect our citizens. So I can't thank you enough for adding this to the agenda today, and I'm looking forward to your presentation. Thank you.
And Commissioner Merman, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The thing that strikes me about the information you gave us was it says that there's a requirement in our local government comprehensive plan. So is that, how would we go about doing that?
Kevin is here, and he could probably address that better than the EPC.
I mean, he doesn't have to do it right now. I'd like to hear her presentation, but I would like to have him come up because we are addressing our comprehensive plan, and I'm like all for being efficient. If we could do it all at one time, it'd be better than trying to do separate things. But I do think it says that our comprehensive plan must contain a coastal redevelopment component that addresses how to eliminate inappropriate and unsafe development in the coastal areas. So I think that's important, very important.
Yes, Commissioner, and I think when Kevin comes up after Maya's presentation, that's exactly what the vulnerability assessment is. That's your first tool to then go and implement these protections.
Good.
Thank you.
And
Okay,
seeing
Maya?
no one else in the queue? Yep, we can start.
Well, good morning. My name is Maya Burke. I'm the Science Policy Coordinator for the Tampa Bay Estuary Program and the co-facilitator of a group called the Tampa Bay Climate Science Advisory Panel. Thank you to Commissioner Smith for inviting me to speak with you all today. And I also want to thank Commissioner White for your support of the Estuary Program's participation in this important work for the region. And what an encouraging conversation. You all are making my work much easier by engaging so readily in this important topic. But the purpose of my presentation today is to share with you some of the key findings of our recently updated regional projection of sea level rise for the Tampa Bay region. And also to familiarize yourselves with the Tampa Bay Climate Science Advisory Panel as a resource as you work with your staff to make the citizens of Hillsborough County more resilient and prepared for these different types of natural events that we are experiencing with greater frequency. So a little bit about the Tampa Bay Climate Science Advisory Panel. This is an ad hoc group of scientists. It was convened originally in 2014 by UF-IFAS Extension Florida Sea Grant, and it's now co-facilitated by them as well as myself on behalf of the Tampa Bay Estuary Program. This group has representatives from all levels of government. We have federal entities as well as state, regional, and local government representatives in the group. We have universities, representatives from academia who are doctors and experts in the field, and also representatives from private sector who conduct novel research and implement on-the-ground adaptation projects themselves that are able to provide robust and complementary insight into our work. So the objective of this group is really to provide counsel regarding the appropriate application of the best available science to local governments whom are choosing to make their citizens more resilient to the effects of a changing climate. And our first real project was to produce a recommended projection of sea level rise for the Tampa Bay region. This is something that's similar. You might be familiar with the work that the Southeast Florida Climate Compact did, putting out a unified projection of sea level rise. And this was our effort to provide that similar resource to the folks in Tampa Bay. So we completed that in 2015, and it was shared at the summit that folks have referenced earlier today. Really, the way that we came to provide that recommendation was through a long process that used literature review, facilitated discussions, featured speakers, and collaborative writing. Those recommendations are ones that have been used somewhat unevenly throughout the region, but we're certainly noticing that there's much more attention being paid to these issues surrounding climate change, and we're hoping that changes with this update. So the recommendation that we originally put out in 2015, we updated earlier this year. It was published and shared with the Tampa Bay Regional Resilience Coalition, and we're going on sort of a tour of local governments and interested individuals to provide this information to you directly as a resource for your efforts. So there are 4 key messages in this updated recommendation that I'd like to share with you today. The first is that we know sea level rise is already happening here in Tampa Bay. We've experienced 7.8 inches of sea level rise that have been measured at the St. Petersburg tide gauge located in downtown St. Pete near the College of Marine Science and the U.S. Coast Guard Station. And that's since 1946, so 7.8 inches since 1946. The second thing that we would like local governments to consider as they're planning for sea level rise is, as Commissioner Smith alluded to in her opening comments, global sea level change is an averaging of the sea surface heights throughout the world. And how each region experiences sea level rise is really unique to a lot of different local conditions. Things like subsidence or land motion, circulation patterns, wind patterns, rainfall patterns, all of these things can contribute to different and variable sea level experiences for different communities. So for example, communities in coastal Louisiana experience far greater rates of sea level rise than we do here in the Tampa Bay region, largely because the Mississippi River has been redirected and those deltas are not building land the way they historically have, and that creates a feeling that sea level rise is occurring at these greater rates. So the St. Petersburg tide gauge is the one that has the longest and most robust period of record for our region, and that's why we recommend that any local government planning for sea level rise correct those global projections using the data that's been collected at the St. Petersburg tide gauge. And I have a note up here about Cedar Key. The Resilience Coalition does include some of our communities to the north in Hernando and Citrus County. And so consistent with this recommendation about recognizing local conditions, we recommend that those local governments actually use a different tide gauge that's stationed out at Cedar Key. The next big point that we would like to emphasize is that any projection of sea level rise that a local government uses should be consistent with the estimates and methods that are included in the National Climate Assessment. The National Climate Assessment was first funded during the Reagan administration and implemented by the first Bush administration. It's required by law, the Global Research Change Act of 1990, and must be updated every 4 to 5 years. So what the National Climate Assessment does is it summarizes the likely effects, uncertainties, and trends in global climate change. And it does this in two parts. The first is the physical science basis, and the second covers various topics of national interest, some regionally specific considerations, and different adaptation and mitigation actions that the country is currently experiencing. This document is a great one to point to and to use in your efforts because it's so robust. The sea level rise estimates that it includes are produced as a coordinated interagency task force to identify nationally agreed upon estimates for both global and regional sea level rise. It incorporates the input from more than 300 federal and non-federal experts, as well as from more than 1,000 stakeholders who participated in regional engagement workshops. The document itself is also subject to not just peer review, but also public and policy review. It's a well-vetted document. So the National Climate Assessment includes 6 scenarios or curves for sea level change throughout the country. But only 3 of those curves are recommended by the Tampa Bay Climate Science Advisory Panel. The first curve that we recommend local governments consider using is the intermediate low. The intermediate low represents a little shy of 2 feet of sea level rise by 2100. It represents a slight increase in the rate of sea level rise that we're currently measuring. It's considered very likely to occur if we continue to emit greenhouse gases the way we are today. However, there's a 96% chance that we will see sea level rise that is greater than this 2 feet by the year 2100. The second scenario or curve that we recommend is the NOAA intermediate curve. This represents just shy of 4 feet by 2100. It represents a moderate increase in the rate of sea level rise. It's considered likely if we continue to emit greenhouse gases at the rates we currently are. There's about a 17% chance that we would see more than 4 feet of sea level rise by the end of century. Finally, the last curve that we recommend is the NOAA high curve. This curve is 8.5 feet of sea level rise by 2100. That's a lot of sea level rise. This represents a significant rate in the increase in the rate of sea level rise that we're currently measuring at the Tampa Bay area. It's only considered very likely if you account for both instabilities in the ice sheets and if we continue to emit greenhouse gases the way we currently are today. I want to be very clear. There is a less than 1% chance that we would see more than 8.5 feet of sea level rise by end of century. So you might have noticed that I didn't include a scenario called NOAA low. So one of the notable differences in this update is that we're recommending not to use that scenario. So why? What's different? What's new? Well, since we put out our initial recommendation in 2015, some really important peer-reviewed research has been conducted and published. This work, which was done in part by my colleague Dr. Gary Mitchum at the USF College of Marine Science, uses observations, so not modeled data, but observed and measured data over a 25-year time period using satellite altimeters that measure the sea surface height. And what it does is it shows that rate of sea level rise actually is increasing. So they are observing the acceleration in the rate of sea level rise. That increase, they show, is consistent with the mathematical models that are used to project sea level rise for both the IPCC, their International Panel on Climate Change reports, as well as the National Climate Assessment. So the models are correct. They're being validated by data that we're collecting on the ground. So what this shows is that the linear projection of a historic rate of rise, which is what the period of record that we measure at the St. Petersburg tide gauge shows us, and what the low scenario extrapolates into the future, is something that cannot be validated by our own observations of the world around us, and is therefore considered very unlikely. That's why we recommend you don't use the NOAA low scenario for your planning purposes. So you might have also noticed that I'm talking about greenhouse gases. When we first started talking about sea level rise and adaptation planning in the Tampa Bay region, a lot of times we talked about sea level rise and it was a way to sort of bracket the larger conversation about climate change. But something that's new about the National Climate Assessment is that the fourth National Climate Assessment for the first time employs a probabilistic approach. This approach is something that actually might be very useful to you all as policymakers and decision makers because it helps give you an ability to assess the likelihood of one scenario over another. But what it does is require that I talk about greenhouse gas emissions, specifically that I talk to you something about called a representative concentration pathway. So for those of you who don't know, a representative concentration pathway, or an RCP, is basically a future concentration of heat-trapping gases in the atmosphere that are based on different assumptions about human behavior. So what we talk about in our recommendation is RCP 8.5, and that's typically known as the business as usual approach. It's something that we can associate with the following human behaviors. We continue to increase our population. We continue to have a carbon-intense energy mix. And we don't innovate and have new technologies that are moving us in different directions. So we know that future sea level rise depends on these greenhouse gas emissions because they're what's causing things like the thermal expansion of our oceans, which contributes to sea level rise, and to land-based ice melt. So the physics of sea level change and global atmospheric warming are things that have been well known and documented since the 1800s. This is not new science. It's really the human behavior that's complex and difficult to predict, and that is what accounts for the wide range of uncertainty in our projections. So because sea level change is connected so closely to these greenhouse gas emissions, one of the important CSAP recommendations is that any sea level rise scenario should be assessed based on this RCP 8.5 scenario until we start to see evidence that suggests otherwise. If we start to see substantive policies that are enacted where we're changing our energy mix to renewable sources, we're seeing less population growth and more technological innovation by the private sector that's being widely adopted, then we can revisit and reevaluate. But what we're seeing now, the behaviors that we're consistently engaging in, are things that are characterized by this 8.5 scenario. And so that's what you should use to assess the likelihood of experiencing any one of these sea level rise scenarios. Okay, so that was a mouthful. So here's the bottom line. The Tampa Bay region can expect to experience an additional 2 to 8.5 feet of sea level rise by end of century. This is about 1 foot to 1.5 feet higher than our last recommendations based on all of the new work that's been done and incorporated into the National Climate Assessment. And that's a really big range. So what do you do when somebody tells you, 2 or 8 feet? How does that help you plan? Well, unfortunately, we don't have a silver bullet. Like I said, all of those human behaviors are really important, but what we can give you is some tools about how to think about how to incorporate this in your adaptation planning. But really, we encourage local governments and other entities that are planning for sea level rise to consider a variety of factors: where your project is located, how long you expect it to last, how tolerant you are for risk in general, and that can be a personal preference or a policy perspective that's offered by this board or another board, the overall cost of a project, and how critical is it to the health, safety, and welfare of your community. These are all important pieces of how you should move forward with your adaptation strategies, and they're useful for providing context to the numbers that are included in our recommendation. So that's the information that I have for you today. It's been a privilege to talk to you all, and I'm happy to entertain any questions you have. And I hope that you continue to use folks like the Tampa Bay Climate Science Advisory Panel as a resource as you look to protect the health, safety, and welfare of your community. And I always like to leave with a picture of my son, because it's not just about us today, it's also about the next generations. And that's a big part of why I do this work. I want him to enjoy this place that's so special to me, and I want him to be able to pass that same legacy on. So thank you very much.
Thank you for that very powerful presentation. Commissioner Smith, did you have comments to make?
I'm so glad that you were able to bring this here to our county, and we could put this in context of the decisions that we have to make. Commissioner Merman nailed down that we really have to look at this, and we're required by state law to look at these considerations as we move forward in our comprehensive plan. I'm struck by the wide range of possibilities. It could be 2 feet, it could be 4 feet, it could be 8 feet by 2,100, and that is all depending on human behavior. And to me, because we are the most vulnerable place in America for sea level rise, it falls on us in part to be among the leaders of reducing our carbon footprint and doing what we can to bring that range down towards the 2 feet instead of the 8 feet and lead by example. So I really appreciate this, the science-based data, the update in for our local area. It's really fascinating how sea level rise is not like you would think, like a bathtub. It's the same everywhere. There's a lot of factors, including the rotation of the earth, that makes the water pile up in different ways in different areas. So we're really lucky to have the Tampa Bay Estuary Program. I believe Commissioner White chairs that group. And
it ended up as vice chair for another term, but we'll see if the opportunity.
We'll see if we can recruit you.
And we're really lucky to have that body of scientists giving us this targeted, customized data and vision that we can use in our planning moving forward. Thank you so much for coming today.
Thank you.
Commissioner Overman, you recognized?
Yeah, I just have a either observation or question. I'm not sure which it will be. As we move forward in our comprehensive planning and our transportation planning, how closely does a group like this or the various different agencies that are involved in this process work with the Department of Transportation in their specs and design? For example, in your slide 30, you showed a picture of a waterway and a bridge.
Yeah.
I know that in our list of transportation projects, we have a significant number of bridges that are either being considered for replacement, past time to replace, or will be on the target for replacement, with a certain estimate of life expectancy. So, if we're looking at the most vulnerable area and want to be best prepared for worst case scenario, are we looking at building a bridge, we're using an 8.5 feet sea level rise estimate? Because if we're still using, 1.9, we're going to end up having flooded bridges, in less than 20 years, so, and bridges tend to last a lot longer than that. So I'm just, my curiosity is is your agency and are the agencies that we're working with transportation when it comes to design to be better resilient? Because that's, as a fiscally responsible person trying to make plans for transportation, I'm looking at, well, if we're going to do this, let's make sure we only spend it once rather than, 3 times because we got it wrong.
So I have a couple of thoughts on that. The first is that that's really an area where you all as elected officials can help advance that conversation, because when you speak about priorities and expectations, the district offices at the Florida Department of Transportation really do listen. So we have done work both with your MPO staff as well as with the DOT Central Office. They have put together some tools. One of them is called the Sea Level Rise Sketch Planning Tool. And then the MPO here in Hillsborough County has been very successful getting some pilot projects with the FHWA to look at how your roadways are vulnerable to both sea level rise and storm surge. So, and we've worked with them on those efforts. But it's definitely challenging. We've had these discussions, for example, with the Howard Franklin Bridge reconstruction. And I just want to put a little clarifying note. It's not the bridges as much that we need to be worried about. It's more the approaches, because those are the low-lying areas. And then is it connecting to low-lying areas that may be experiencing increasing flooding and be less and less habitable? So there are some really hard and important questions. And I think the point about whether or not there's a return on investment as we make these large capital expenditures into these important projects, we need to balance that with how does it affect our gross regional product? And, are these areas ones that we're going to continue to need to live, enjoy, to, generate revenue for our communities? So these are really hard questions. And the best examples of folks that I'm aware of that are already having these conversations in Pinellas County, they had a couple of different bridge designs for the Honeymoon Island Causeway Bridge, and then also over Riviera Bay connecting out to Weeden Island, the San Martin Bridge. So they've been discussing and looking at different sea level rise scenarios and trying to get their feedback both from the local community as well as from their elected officials about what are the appropriate scenarios to use. And I have to tell you, we're all over the map on what our priorities are and how we feel. Some folks want to protect to the highest level, but they don't want to spend all of those resources for areas that are vulnerable and we may not be able to use for the full life of the bridge. So there's really hard questions. Unfortunately, I don't have an easy answer for you, but you're on the right track. You're asking the important and right ways to be thinking about these things.
And the reason that becomes so important is many of these bridges are our evacuation zones.
Yes.
And most recently, we've got a couple of research projects for, roads to move to the north, which I always thought was the way to get out of a hurricane area rather than from east to west, because typically this storm just follows you across the state from one direction to the other. So going to the north may be, the way that we're looking at ways to build an evacuation resource. It also impacts environmentally sensitive lands. But if the goal were to drive economy, get a return on investment, to create an opportunity for evacuation, then it's very clear that above ground and taking into consideration sea level rise, at least in my eyes, would require an elevated type of expansion of a roadway system that was designed for evacuation purposes, as well as economic development. So if those things aren't taken into consideration in our long-term planning for ways that people get around, I think we would be remiss in not recognizing how critically important the work here is being done. And thank you.
Thank you. I have a couple questions. I'm pleased, or I think it's important, that you've dropped the low estimates on the NOAA low estimates, because I know in your prior report there was even almost some disclaimers in there with regards to the low estimates. With the sea level rising right now between 1946 and present, it was 7.8 inches. Mm-hmm. But I think a lot of that was even more recent. Can you speak to that?
You can start to see an uptick in the rate of rise, but the amount of the data points that we have aren't enough to generate a really strong statement about the nature of the relationship there. So if I'm trying not to drop math on everybody, but we do see that that annual rate that NOAA reports in millimeters per year has ticked up over the last couple of years, which indicates we're seeing more of that in the last 20 years or so. But there are really some limitations with the data that makes me want to be real cautious about what I say to you on that subject.
And as I understand it, with the ice melting, it's cooling the current in the Atlantic Ocean. The oscillation that creates the Gulf current that we have. And as it cools, if it should, and slows, that water piles up right at our doorstep here in Florida and the Caribbean. Is that accurate? And how does that play into your what you record here or predict?
We've discussed many of these different natural processes at length, and the Climate Science Advisory Panel members don't feel that that's the strongest explanatory variable for what's going on with sea level rise. And let me just kind of take a step back and say that if you read the report, you'll see that while we're pretty clear about not using the NOAA low, we're not as closed off to using that extreme scenario in the future as we learn more. And part of that reason is because science, by its very nature, is conservative. We require multiple lines of evidence proven over time and by studies that are reproduced, and then in different phenomena that are supporting one hypothesis. And in order to get that sort of level of confidence to make projections, you might underestimate before you overestimate something like this. So we have a crack, we've left a crack open. The door's cracked for that on the extreme scenario. And this is the most rapidly evolving area of scientific research on this topic, is understanding these ice melt dynamics. We know that there's also positive feedback loops, things that are basically contributing to greater instabilities within the system. So we have known unknowns, and that's about the most we can say about some of those things. So it's something to keep watching, and that's also why we're committed to continue to meet as a body and evaluate the best available science as it comes out, and share and revise our recommendations with you all as that information changes and we know more.
I'll wrap my questions up in a minute, but I do think this is the most critical thing facing us for a century to come, and something that we can't move too quickly on, or talk enough about, or think enough about how we move forward on. In the slide that you have with the greenhouse gases, if you could just, I think that's a really important slide. If I don't know if we can get to that again.
I have it up.
It's transportation, it's 28%, and electricity, and
It's up there. Yeah.
sorry.
It's okay.
I think that's really important for us to recognize, because part of this is baked in, 2 feet, 5 feet, 8 feet, I'm not sure, or no one is. And part of it is something that we still have an opportunity to perhaps contain at some point. So transportation, the 28%, and I know a lot of, I look at, in decades to come, vehicles, transportation becoming electric, hopefully renewably powered. But that's the 28% there. The electricity generation, again, is the 28%. We're almost at, we're near 56% with that, between the two of them. And again, I'm just, I don't know where else to talk about this but we have our local energy supplier, TECO, is looking at 40 years out with a gas plant with greenhouse gases, and I really am looking and hoping that they'll take the direction of FP&L to start to commit more widely to solar and battery technology, to start to limit our greenhouse gases. It's just it's just almost unconscionable with what we're facing. We have to do everything that possibly can. In terms of industry, we look at industry, agriculture is self-explanatory to me, but the industry, the commercial and residential, besides transportation, electricity generation, what are the kinds of, or can you speak to the kinds of things that can be done to, it looks like we have very little opportunity at residential and commercial, but in industry, what are the kinds of measures that can be taken beyond transportation and electricity generation to reduce greenhouse gases? Is that an answer you have?
Well, I think that this is national scale data, and so I think that skews some of the percentages for certain. But often you find when you think about environmental problems, wicked problems from that large scale, some of the biggest bang for your buck can be going after these, singular point sources that are really responsible for so much more. We've seen that story told through the history of Tampa Bay recovery, by addressing point sources of pollution with our wastewater treatment plants and our power generating facilities. We're able to accomplish a whole lot. And now what we're working on is these non-point sources of pollution. So I think that's more of what this is showing. And I think the same kind of, for this particular slide, the same sorts of energy efficiency programs that you've seen, retrofitting, things like that are applicable for commercial and residential. With agriculture and also development, I mean, every time you clear land, you're releasing carbon into the atmosphere. That is, part of that cycle as well. But agriculture, I do just want to highlight, especially because of Commissioner White's invocation this morning to really think about it. And I've seen a lot of promising work coming out of the University of Florida. They've been convening farmers throughout the state because not associated with sea level rise, although we may have some issues with that because so much of our agriculture is in southeastern Hillsborough County, which is vulnerable to sea level rise. But heat is really important for crop yields. And so the residents of this county, the farmers of this county, are feeding a large portion of our region. And if they're seeing reduced crop yields because we've got these heat index days of 110 plus degrees, that creates real challenges for them, both from us as a community and our social fabric, for them economically. How much more land do they then require to generate the same amount of food? And so there's a lot of innovative work that the folks at the University of Florida are doing with that particular community. I'm a little out of my wheelhouse in some of the specific adaptation measures, but I know that's a really important part of the conversation. And I know that, farmers have always been really great to adopt these sort of things, like with water conservation technology. And that's really what I think is the good news story here. I look at this slide as opportunities. These are all things that we can control. And honestly, making good choices is good not just for the world that we live in, but it's also good for the bottom line. Mm-hmm. And that's really what we've found is effective for moving the needle on things like improving Tampa Bay. And I hope that we can take some of those lessons learned from how to make Tampa Bay better and apply it to this really wicked and challenging problem of climate change and sea level rise as well.
And I just have one more question, because when we were at that conference 4 years ago, and part of what was brought up that surprised me, we have limestone karst underlying our state, as I understand it, in the areas of Miami-Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach. The limestone karst there kind of precludes for them dealing with this in any kind of way. Also, the fact that they're right along a coastal shore there, but what is happening there now is that the water is coming up through the ground, through the limestone, through the manholes, the pipes, everything else. It doesn't even need to be raining or storming, king tide flooding, all that. As I understand it, we're in a little bit different geography here, and that we don't have quite the limestone karst base. And so there was talk at that conference that I very much remember about diking the front of Tampa Bay with huge walls and open gates. They were, and I was kind of taken aback by that even being a possibility, or that even being something that looked at, that obviously would not do anything for the Pinellas coastlines, but I mean, I guess it would be possible.
I think I'm glad you brought that up. It's something that I hear a lot. But so in Southeast Florida, a lot of them they'll experience sea level rise on the Everglades side, or the Everglades coast part, before from that side of the state before they will from the Atlantic Ocean, and that's interesting for people to wrap their heads around. And then people get scared, right? And what's really different here is that we have a clay confining layer, and so that clay is acting as a stopgap or a cork, so that as seawater moves in, as that gradient pushes in, kind of like what you might know about from like the sharp well fields and how you're trying to create a freshwater wedge over there, we have this clay layer that's stopping it from seeping up through sort of like pockets in the rocks and the surface. So that's not as big of a concern for our area. But what I do hope that we're able to learn by sort of being the second mouse that gets the cheese, right? So the first one got trapped and we're the second one. So we can learn a lot of really good lessons from Southeast Florida. And I know we also bring folks from like the Netherlands here, and we talk about living with water. A lot of their approaches to adaptation have been highly engineered gray solutions, and there's a place for some of that. But there's also, very turbid discharges, so a lot of solid material suspended in the water that they're pumping, the floodwaters that they're pumping out from their streets into their bays. We don't want to do that because we've invested so heavily in protecting Tampa Bay. We can learn lessons about other strategies, and I think that we know enough about circulation and the importance and role of interplay of saltwater and freshwater, how critical that is for our fisheries, both recreationally, commercially. I mean, water is our way of life. It's who we are. And so I think we should think very hard about those kinds of solutions. But what's important is we don't have a failure of imagination. What that is that's a bid, right? Someone is putting out an idea of what adaptation might look like. And we can build on that, and we can have a conversation and generate ideas. And hopefully we get to an idea for what adaptation looks like that's better, more attractive for us all, and that accomplishes those same things of protecting the people and the natural resources and the economic resources of our region.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Seeing no further questions, it was a really compelling, wonderful, really strong presentation. So thank you, Commissioner Smith, for bringing that to our attention. So we'll move now to the Executive Director's report.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Did we want to hear from the?
We can. We do have county staff here. They can tell you.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. The vulnerability assessment. Many of you had questions about that, and Kevin Moran is in the audience, and he's coming to the microphone to let you know what the status is of that vulnerability assessment.
Good morning, Commissioners. Kevin Moran, Environmental Services Division. The county has hired, recognizing the requirements of the statute under the perils, that's referred to as perils of flood, we hired the Florida Center for Community Design and Research, Taryn Sabia's group at University of South Florida, really exciting group that she put together, including professors from the College of Public Health, Engineering, Planning, and the School of Architecture. And they've started on a process of reviewing our vulnerabilities to flood. They broke those vulnerabilities down into specific vulnerable communities. They've looked at the entire county, not just the coastline. And part of their assignment is come back to us with policy recommendations that will be incorporated into the comprehensive plan. Our answer to the statutes are due in 2020, so it's their draft policies will be due in December, I believe. And I think that we're going to try to bring something to the board in around October from the group. But I did want to say quickly to Commissioner Overman, my group's also a member of the Resiliency Coalition, and one of the things we're working on is a CIP decision tool, like you mentioned, and it would incorporate everything you said, cost of a project, length of a project, to make sure that we're making the right decisions. So.
No questions?
Any further? Commissioner White, you're recognized.
I just want to state for the record that we did not coordinate together on our wardrobe selection.
You do look very handsome today.
That's awesome.
You might get a public records request.
Thank you, Commissioners, and I want to thank Kevin Moran and the whole environmental group with the county. They meet with us periodically. We collaborate. Lucia Garces, John Lyons, Bart Weiss, Kevin Moran, Jeff Greenwell, and George Cassidy. So I think that started about a year ago, and it's been synergistic and very good for us to know, to feedback on each other and collaborate as well. So thank you very much for being here today, Kevin. Thanks. Commissioner, as we move into the Executive Director report, the first thing I wanted to bring everyone's attention to is remembering Dina Levengood and to express our sincerest condolences to the family of her. Dina was an individual who lived fearlessly and set her course in life based on convictions of heart. This propelled her into advocating for the causes that she felt near and dear to. She was involved in affordable housing, the homeless, and the environment was also near and dear to her heart. She was the youngest member of Save Our Bays, which actually was SOBAC was brought in front of this board many, many years ago and awarded an award for protecting the environment. She was a founding member of the Florida Aquarium and talked about the need for it and went to the city of Tampa and Hillsborough County and literally camped out in her car and was there all the time as that thing was being built. That was an advocacy of hers. And she served on our environmental feedback group under Dr. Garrity since its inception and myself as well. And I think Rick Shantz and I would say that she called us all of the time, asked for our feedback, and gave us her feedback. And that was invaluable as well. This is a picture that I think just sums it up for Dina here, holding everybody's hand and smiling at the beach and standing up for a cause. But I did want to read, this was on her Facebook post, and I think it's a beautiful quote that sums her up. It says, "Now more than ever, we must stand up, demand equality, honor our differences, defend the Constitution, trust women, pay attention, believe in science, read real news, speak out, be generous, help those in need, choose love, and be the change." And I think Dina was all of those things. Before we move on, honoring the students, I did want to bring to everyone's attention, we had originally had a presentation for Commissioner White's issue on the Little Manatee River, the wild and scenic designation. And the estuary program reached out to us and asked for a letter, which we have prepared, but I just wanted to bring it to everyone's attention on the board. I'm not sure if Commissioner White, as his vice chair of the estuary program, would need one also for Vern Buchanan. But we do, I have signed it, I have copies of it, but I just wanted to make sure that the board was, that it was a 7-0 vote, so I assume this board is very favorable of us forwarding this letter. I think we're trying to get it to them so it can go to the Manatee County Commission as well. So, any feedback?
Commissioner White, you're recognized.
Yeah, and the more I think about it, I don't think we need to do one addressed to Congressman Buchanan, but if you'd be so kind, if the board agrees, if you'd send one on to the Manatee County Commission, because they take a vote on their companion resolution on August 20th. And if the board agrees, if you would just give the second copy to me, and I'm going to include it in the packet that I send to Congressman Buchanan. I intend to have enclosures that include all the letters of support of this initiative.
So you'd like it addressed directly to them, or not just a copy of ours to the estuary program?
You can address it really to the estuary program, to the Hillsborough County Board of County Commissioners, either one, and I'll just make sure that that gets forwarded to Congressman Buchanan as a letter of support, because all the other letters that I have in my possession, like from the Save the Manatee Club, the Sun City Center Audubon Club, they're all addressed to the various county commissions. So I'll just put those in as enclosures, and that just demonstrates to the congressman that we have that level of support.
All right, thank you.
And Commissioner, we have copies. I'll let Mr. Shantz pass them out, so each of you have the signed copy. as well. And, you know, depending if time permits, I may actually go attend that board meeting. I'm happy to speak on behalf of the advocacy. And I just want to commend this board. I've canoed every single river in this county and almost every single river in the state. And this is one of the last few pristine rivers. So congratulations, Commissioner White, and all of you commissioners for protecting one of the most valuable resources in this county.
And I'm going to go ahead and make a motion that, number one, this is a board-approved letter, and number two, that we give Ms. Doherty board approval to speak on behalf of the board when she attends the Manatee County Commission meeting on August 20th.
We have a motion by Commissioner White, seconded by Commissioners Overman and Smith. And seeing no further comments, please record your vote.
Motion carried 5-0.
And thank you for this. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Commissioner. Moving back to the Executive Director report, EPC hosted students from the Future Leaders in Planning, the FLIP program, and it's offered through the Planning Commission. This FLIP program is designed as an opportunity to introduce high school students to urban planning as a potential career. The group spent the afternoon learning about how our agency operates relating to the planning process. I'd like to extend kudos to our staff presenters with a special shout out to Chris Pratt, who served as our tour leader. They all did an amazing job, and the insights they shared were among the highest rated by students at the end of their 4-day program. Our philanthropic committee spearheaded the effort to collect school supplies for Backpacks of Hope campaign. In all, 4 barrels of school supplies, which included 45 backpacks, were donated by staff and others at the Roger P. Stewart Center. I'd like to give a thank you to Amanda Warnick for coordinating that. The next thing was that staff participated in Camp Bayou Back to School and Back to Nature School Supply Drive. The event featured nature-themed activity stations for children to participate in and distribute much of the needed school supplies to those families. And thank you, Elena Glusica, who was here today for that. And finally, I want to thank all of the volunteers and staff for their efforts who contributed to the school supplies and cash to these campaigns for their generosity and support. I always get my grandson his school supplies, and they're not cheap. And so I appreciate all of your efforts at EPC. The 2019 Hillsborough County Solar Co-op closed on August 2nd. The solar initiative has been highly successful. The co-op members selected SolarSource as the installation contractor following a competitive bidding process. And Maya, as you said, we can each do our part. I have solar. I know Mr. Fass had solar. Some homes can't sustain solar, but I really appreciate the county for the 3rd time stepping up to the plate and helping fund the solar co-op. Overall, there were 208 signups and 81 qualified roofs. So for 21 members who have signed contracts, so far, 21 members have signed contracts, and 1 solar installation is complete. That's pretty good for closing on August 2nd. I'm so pleased that EPC has been a partner with the county, Florida Solar United Neighbors, and others to make solar energy affordable and attainable for the residents of Hillsborough County. EPC's senior leadership staff held our mid-year strategic planning session last week. We set aside this time to evaluate EPC's progress towards meeting our agency goals and to ensure that our actions align with achieving intended outcomes. We plan to present our official strategic planning update for your review and input in January or February of next year. Staff attended the 2019 Florida Local Environmental Resource Agencies Conference, and I'm honored to announce that Rick Shantz was selected by FLARA Board of Directors to receive the 2019 Environmental Leadership Award. This this award is presented to the FLARA member who has displayed leadership in their community, as well as advocating for effective environmental policy changes that benefit the entire state of Florida. And I cannot think of a more deserving person for this prestigious award than you, Rick. Congratulations. And commissioners, I also want to remind you that Rick is retiring. It is scheduled for September 27th. We've had, which is wonderful, many commissioners have already replied that they will be in attendance, as well as some of your aides. So in front of you, you have the invitation. Rick has served for 10 years at the Water Management District, where he rose to Deputy General Counsel and has spent the last 19 years with EPC serving as both General Counsel and Director for our legal and administrative services. So I hope you all can join us for that. And we will honor him at our next board meeting. And one of the commissioners has picked a board meeting in the future in October to honor him as well. Lastly, I would like to let
November
you know.
too.
Pardon me?
And November also.
In November. I'd love to do that too. That would be great. And along with our strategic planning, I didn't mention that we will be having our annual annual report will be completed next month. And then, do you have something?
If I could pipe in with
Absolutely.
that. With our annual report that we always do in September, a couple of the new commissioners probably haven't seen this process yet, but that follows, we'll be passing out the evaluations for the executive director at the next board meeting, and then you'll have a month until our October meeting when the executive director's contract requires that the board give her evaluation at that time. So we'll be passing out the paperwork in September in conjunction with the annual report, and then you'll have that ready for October. So I'm sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to make sure we...
That's all right. I'll let you know that along with that, you'll be receiving, probably a week later, we typically send out the self-evaluation. When Kevin Beckner was here and other board members, there are rigorous metrics that the executive director has to meet. And so we'll give you all of that in a self-evaluation as well to help you with your grading of the executive director. And lastly, I'd like to let you know that the Tampa Bay Association of Environmental Professionals will be hosting the 2019 Florida Association of Environmental Professionals Conference. It is happening September 19th through the 20th at the Embassy Suites right here in downtown Tampa. Conference topics will include resiliency, transpiration, assessment, and remediation of ecosystem management. Among the scheduled speakers is EPC's own Dr. Dave Carlin with our Water Division. He will be presenting information on the Water Quality Index for Tampa Bay and an evaluation of historical water quality trends since 1974. And I plan to attend. We have a few people here also. We're members of TBAEP, but it's nice that we're going to have the state conference here. And so if you have the opportunity to attend, we'll be happy to get you more information to assist. And with that, that concludes our meeting, and thank you all so much, and thank you, Maya, and thank you, Kevin, for attending, and congratulations to Stephanie and Christina.
Thank you for that report. Any other further comments? Seeing none, we're adjourned.